I almost didn't make this video because I actually loathe the fear mongering that happens in social media. But actually, I think it's important for us to not have our head in the sand. Unemployment data was released recently, and it was a big miss. And along with some other indicators that I kind of pay attention to and have for a while now, I think there are some warning signs that we need to start probably preparing, maybe not for worst case zombie apocalypse scenarios, but battening down the hatches, so to speak. So in this video, I want to kind of just go through some of the indicators I'm looking at, and I'm going to give you my take on them. And by the end of this video, I don't want you to be afraid, but I want you to be taking the situation seriously so that you can start to prepare. I've actually worked through now 3 recessions. That's why I'm not afraid. I know that the market cycles, but it is kind of starting to feel a little bit like it did in the run up to the 2008 recession. That I remember pretty clearly. I worked through that. I kind of stuck my head in the sand back in 08 and in 09, and I almost got myself into a really bad situation. A lot of the warning signs were being flashed, and so we decided to go ahead and sell our house. We ended up selling the house for a loss. I had to come to closing with about $10,000 of cash that I didn't have. We were near bankruptcy at the time. Because I was sort of paying attention and I decided to dig my head out of the sand, when I started to see the foreclosure numbers kind of not going down, that was when I decided, I decided to take action. Got the house sold, and we were able to move to the location we needed to move. And we got out of a bad situation. It took us a few years to recover. I lived with my in-laws for 2 years with 3 kids in diapers in about 1,400 square feet. But that's what we had to do to get out of that situation. And I was actually pretty proud of that, of us taking action. So some of the numbers, and I've just got my notes here, me looking down, hoping I don't, trip over something. There was a big miss on the employment forecast. Both the unemployment went up significantly more than was forecast, and the number of job openings were a lot lower. So like 75,000 fewer jobs created than was forecast, and the unemployment rate was 4.3% and was forecast at 4.1%. While those numbers themselves, if you just look at just the numbers, aren't maybe particularly concerning, the trend is particularly concerning. And so when it comes to the unemployment rate, there's an economist who created this indicator called the SOM indicator. And her SOM rule was triggered for the first time since about 2008, if you exclude the 2020 pandemic. It's basically a momentum indicator. So the number has been increasing, and the rate of increase has been increasing. So think of like a boulder or a flywheel that starts to spin, and it picks up momentum. At some point, the indicator says it has enough momentum now, it's gonna keep going up. So if you look at the chart, it looks exactly like it did kind of in that 2008 timeframe, and when mainstream media was saying there wasn't going to be a recession and not to worry. So the job postings themselves continue to decline, and they're still above the 2019 levels. So, in theory, we're still on an upward trajectory from before the pandemic. But now we have this problem of ghost jobs that we didn't have back then. And I've seen different estimates of 20 to 40% of job openings are ghost jobs. IT in particular got hit. So recently there was actually a 20,000 job decrease, where other sectors still were seeing some mild growth. IT jobs actually went down since the last reading. The actual hiring rate, so new jobs, people getting hired onto new jobs, is the lowest since April 2020. That's obviously a little concerning because we know April 2020, we were right in the middle of the pandemic. And so now you could also look at this as, well, how much lower can it go? And you'll hear some of that rhetoric as well. And it's just reminding me so much of 2008 it was the same kind of rhetoric. Well, we've already seen the bottom. We've already seen the bottom. We've already seen the bottom. And the bottom just kept falling, in particular in home prices and unemployment. The last employment number I have here, when we talk about percentages, it can paint a picture directionally, but when you look at just the sheer number of unemployed Americans, it's 7.2 million, which is a 22% year over year increase. I don't know what that number comes out to be, 1.5 million additional unemployed Americans, which kind of matches up with, I think, what a lot of us are seeing anecdotally, just seeing and feeling right on the ground, so to speak. I would say tech in particular is in a tricky spot. Tech as an industry, IT, jobs. Obviously, we have all of the AI uncertainty. And at least what I have seen is AI not taking jobs, but it has almost like locked up hiring, because a lot of companies are in this wait and see mode. They don't really know how it's going to pan out. The hype around AI wholesale replacing software engineers is dying down, thankfully. But there's still a lot of uncertainty when it comes to hiring. Should they just wait? Maybe AI can just make my existing workforce 25% more effective, and I don't need to hire anybody next year. So there's still a lot of that happening. The software developer job postings, and this is all engineering type roles, network engineering database. It's at near pandemic lows currently. When I read that number, I thought, okay, here's some validation. It's easy to kind of feel like we're being gaslit into believing that the market is fine. But when you see a number like that, it's job openings at the pandemic levels. So yeah, okay, it kind of feels that way out there. Over the last, I think it was 4 or 5 years, the number of contractor and even freelancer type openings far outpaced the number of full-time positions. We've heard, a lot of companies, it's continuing to move certain positions out of the US or moving them to contract. So a lot of these layoffs that happened, those people, they would turn around and open contract roles for those, or hire someone from outside of the geography. So that trend will continue. That's not going to slow down overall from a world perspective. It's becoming more global. Access to these skill sets is becoming more democratized, which to me is a good thing. There's more opportunity for more people. But what it means is for like the Western countries and things like the US, our monopolistic grip on these positions is, loosening. So the last thing I'll kind of say about the tech job landscape is there's supply and demand is at play, obviously, in any market. Over the last 5 or 8 years, we saw a literal explosion of boot camp grads hitting the market. And it just it went up exponentially because there just weren't enough people to fill all the tech jobs. So people started going into boot camps, changing careers. And after the last number I saw was in 2023 or 2, there were close to 60,000 new boot camp grads hitting the market. Combine that with a near exponential growth in new grads coming from comp sci type majors. We have the supply of talent increasing by a lot, and we have the demand for that talent decreasing. The demand meaning the number of job postings. What that means, they're just going to be a lot more competitive. The good thing is tech jobs aren't going anywhere. It's still projected to grow quite a bit. But the competition will just continue to be more intense. So kind of moving on to different, outside of just the employment numbers, I'm not going to enumerate all the layoffs and things. The more recent one was Intel announcing 15,000 jobs. And anybody who's pays attention to chips and stuff, they're not surprised by this. But what is surprising is even given an $8 billion grant, essentially, that the government usually reserves for scientific research, this directly benefited a public company. And the idea was to create jobs and build chips here. and yet the company just can't get their act together, and they just cut 15,000 jobs. And if you go to layoffs.fyi, you can look through the layoffs if you really want to do some doom scrolling. The other layoff that I thought was relevant was Indeed laying off more. They've been laying off people all year, but they're laid off another 1,000 people. What are they seeing? Obviously, they're seeing the same things that this data is seeing, is that there's decreasing demand. They make money when companies post jobs, so they're obviously seeing fewer postings for jobs. So, and then the last thing on the company side, there's been multiple earnings misses, and this is we're getting into more of like the economy as a whole and not just jobs. But I think we need to look at all of these things holistically. McDonald's in particular had a huge earnings miss. Some people say that McDonald's is one of those recession-proof stocks that during a recession, McDonald's does well because people are just trying to eat more cheaply. Other people say McDonald's is more like a snack food, place, and people just are going to do more cooking at home during a recession. And so McDonald's takes a hit. So I guess you could kind of look at it either way. But I thought that was interesting that they missed so badly. Partly another theory is that prices have gone up so much. We're finally seeing the lag effects of inflation to the point where people are no longer able to, literally, they can't afford McDonald's. And that's what they're saying, is that their consumers are tapped out. And we saw the same thing at Amazon, warning kind of a looming slump in demand, that they're seeing kind of their consumers being tapped. I'm not a financial analyst, but I do still pay attention to the stock market. And one of the things that, there was been a pretty big sell-off recently. The market's still up 12% this year, and I think 18% year over year. It's definitely not like a recessionary numbers, but what is concerning with the market is it's the second most overpriced market ever. The first being the 2000 in the year 2000 when we had the big tech bubble burst. So all signs are pointing to a bubble. Now, nobody can predict if that will burst. The other factor is there was so much money pumped into the system for the post-pandemic stimulus, and all that money is kind of making its way through the market. Because basically it was all given to us consumers. We spent it all. We went through all of our savings, and then eventually that goes into the company's hands and it goes into the shareholders' hands and up the chain. So a quick note on housing. And like I said, I try to pay attention to just enough so I can stay informed. It's the most overvalued housing market in history. And we know that, right? We know just how crazy. My home went up like 180% or something in just a couple of years. The housing is also showing signs of being in a bubble, although from what I can understand, not the type of bubble that was in 2008. So, not expecting some cataclysmic drop in value. That said, some geographies are already experiencing price declines. And if it happens similar, when I went through this in 2008, there's a bit of a snowball effect. Once one person in a neighborhood sells for a 20% discount, then that adjusts the comparable values of all those homes in that area. And then the snowball, then they sell their houses for lower. And there's a ton of room to sell these houses for cheaper because people have so much equity in their homes right now. So if you're sitting on $200,000 in equity and you need to get out of your house for some reason, you still have a lot of room to sell and still have some cash after the sale. And then lastly, I want to talk quickly about Fed policy. At the last Fed meeting, what Chairman Powell indicated is that the data is moving favorably, and they think that they're about ready for a rate cut. And that would be kind of in the September timeframe. Some people, they're, jubilant because, when they cut rates, finally, it will free up capital for investment again. And so you could see companies starting to spend again, and it would kind of like unlock the market. But here's the thing, the Fed only cuts rates if there's a problem, right? If there's cracks in the market. What's kind of crappy is the situation that the Fed created by holding interest rates for so low for so long the only way they can see out of this problem, this inflationary problem, is basically to make each of us suffer. They are intentionally want to see the unemployment rate rise. They want to see spending cooling down. They want to see earnings being hit. They want to see all that. And so if they're cutting rates, that means that they're seeing cracks form in the market. And oftentimes they cut rates into a recession. The recession happens after the rate cuts, or as the rate cuts, start to happen. So that's kind of the data points that I wanted to discuss. When you add all these together, when I'm just looking at these objectively, to me, there are warning signs here that we could be heading into a recession. Whether you believe the soft landing narrative or not, I think the data is pointing to at least a continued slowdown in the market. And so what I really wanted to make this video for is to try to convince people that now is actually the time to start prepping for that potential worst case scenario. I think you really need to look at your finances. And this is where it obviously gets very personal. But I think in the last 10 years, we got really used to this period of easy prosperity. It's time to start looking at getting out of some of that debt, even if you have to come with some cash, because what we saw in the last big recession was a value and price depreciation, especially with cars and homes. So for me, I have, during my period of excessive prosperity, I bought a camper van, with that whole camper van life craze. And now I have this massive payment, and I'm really afraid that I'm going to get stuck with it. That thing is for sale right now, and I'm willing to take a loss on it because I just need to get out of that payment right now, because that's kind of the state of mind that I'm in currently. I really hope that didn't, create too much fear. Don't be scared, be prepared I don't know. I heard that from someone. But I think a little bit of fear actually is what kicked me into gear back in, I'll call it the 09 timeframe, when I realized, this is, I was kind of afraid that I was going to get stuck in a house I couldn't afford in a really bad, sketchy neighborhood, which I have another story about. That fear, though, I turned that into action, and we ended up getting out of that situation before anything, before I had to end up declaring bankruptcy or something like that. I'm getting a chewed alive. It's mosquito time here in Central Ohio. And I do want to leave you with, if you're coming from the tech sector, I'm still very bullish on the tech sector. I don't think AI is coming to steal our jobs directly. I think it'll be like any other tool that will help make us more effective. It will end up leading to job growth, but we kind of need this period. We need to get through this period of time. So anyway, I hope that was useful. Again, I'm Ben with Fixing Software. If you got anything out of this, it is super helpful for small channels if you give it a like. And if you didn't like it, give me a dislike, give me a comment. That would be super helpful to help me improve what I'm doing here. Again, I am a small channel. And I'll just leave you with this: just because the software industry, the job market is broken, doesn't mean that we have to be. Thank you so much. See you in the next one.